Welcome. I'm Noah Pickus. I'm Associate Provost at Duke and a Dean at a joint venture campus, Duke Kunshan University in China. And the reason I'm here is the origins of this panel, forgive this one moment, is this book, The New Global Universities, which my colleague Brian Penpraise and I published a few months ago, which is the story of 8 new universities started around the world in the last 25 years. And it's essentially trying to do, we have so many books about entrepreneurial heroes in business and technology and so many other fields. We wanted to do a version of this in higher education. It's not an uncritical book, but it is, frankly, a little bit on the inspirational side. That is, we think it is an incredibly hard thing to start a new university or a new network of universities. And we wanted to tell the stories of these schools. And in particular, we tell the story of 8 schools. One of them is here that Ben started, MINERVA University, that have 2 things in common. One is they are global. That is, this is a story in Africa, it's in Asia, it's in the Middle East, it's in North America. It would have been in Latin America and Europe, but the publisher said that we couldn't have any more chapters, so that limited what we could do. The other part of this book is that it's the story of founders, some from inside the academy, some from outside, who have tried to do something integrated. That is, they weren't trying to do one thing. They weren't trying to fix one aspect of higher education. They were trying to create an integrated, intentional, holistic approach to higher education. And you can think about it more like this, because this is how we entered into this process. I bet everybody in this room at some point, and maybe several times during the day today, has thought, what if I could just start fresh? What if I could just start from the beginning, without the constraints, without the pressures, without the things that we can spend a lot of time complaining and caterwauling about? What if I just started fresh? And some of these universities ended up building very mobile and networked kind of universities around the world. Some were countries that were basically trying to get rid of a colonial version of education and build something that was both high quality, connected to the civilization and culture of their place, and low cost. And others were trying to build truly a global leadership university with students and faculty from all around the world. And it was interesting to see many of the things that they held in common, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as well as the what they were doing that was different, was we were interested in how they went about this. How do you create something from nothing? What are the lessons you can learn from that? And how do you keep sustaining that kind of innovation over time? So the origins of this panel was there are only 8 stories in that book. And there are a lot more universities or other kinds of startups of this kind to tell the story. And so we have this wonderful cast from different parts of the world operating and creating new institutions. And we wanted to ask about their stories and about their advice, both for those of you who want to start something new and for established universities, if I can use that term. So, Ben, let me start with you. Your story is pretty well known here. But why a new university? What were you trying to do that required something new?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a student of the history of universities, especially university reform, which is a pretty esoteric subject because it's very narrow. And there are examples in history when universities had sea change moments. And those sea change moments rippled through usually country systems, but then very quickly they rippled beyond them, especially if they came from the UK or the United States, especially in the 20th century. And those moments happened when a highly prestigious institution decided to do something different. Sometimes those different things were actually quite bad, and everybody just followed like sheep in the bad moment. But every once in a while, there were examples of things that were good that those institutions did, and then people followed. There was one example in history that of a new institution that was founded that kind of parachuted in from the top, and that was Johns Hopkins. So historically, these changes usually came from Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Brown, Stanford, etc. But Johns Hopkins was actually the first university to bring the German research university model to the United States and marry it with the American Liberal Arts College, and effectively declared, we're going to be the best university in the United States, really the only modern university. And within a decade, Harvard, which was at the time 240 years old, fundamentally changed what it was doing. And within a decade after that, basically the entire landscape of American higher education changed as well. And so if my hypothesis was, if you want systematic reform, you've got to either convince the incumbents that are fat and happy to change, not going to happen, or you parachute in from above and you force that change. And so that's the MINERVA theory.
Mallory, where do you come into that history?
Apart from heckling Ben for help on doing this, every step of the way, kind of the other end of the spectrum. So our model was built from a problem out in industry. And prior to higher education, I had only ever focused on one problem. I still do, and that's teacher training and teacher shortages. And so we were seeing over and over again classrooms that did not have qualified teachers in them in the same buildings, including in the building where I was working as a school principal, that there were tons of adults who would have been great teachers, who are working as paraprofessionals, as classroom aides, and they weren't getting their college degree for things that had nothing to do with will or skill. They wanted to be teachers. They wanted to be teachers to these kids in their building where there were no teachers, but they could not afford time out of the workforce. They could not afford the cost of tuition. And so REACH was really meant to go after non-consumption, to focus on adults who were not accessing higher education because they were locked out of that segment of the economy.
SHAI, you've created the University of the People. Why?
I have no clue. I was in for-profit education for over 20 years, and among other things, I started the first online university in Europe through partnership with the University of Liverpool. And that's where I saw how powerful online learning can be. You know, students from all over the world, they can stay home, keep their job, and still get European education. At the same time, I saw that most people cannot afford it. It was too expensive. I ended up selling this for-profit university and came to New York just to realize that there is another way. Because I realized that there is open source technology, open educational resources, and a new phenomena that started to develop through social networking where professors were willing to help their students for free. And I said, that's all you need in order to create a university. And since I realized that there are so many people around the world who simply cannot afford higher education, here is the solution, tuition-free university. So I put it all together and created a tuition-free university. So that was the incentive behind it. I announced it in Munich, Germany. The next day, the New York Times wrote a page about it. And the following day, I already had hundreds of emails from professors who said, this is an amazing idea, we want to help. So they actually built the university because they knew what they're doing. And this is University of the People, based on volunteers since then.
It's always astonishing to me when somebody starts something new, how many people in higher education raise their hand. right, and start emailing and contacting you and wanting to find out how they can get involved in this. So that's a great story. Jonathan, you have a network of universities that you're still building. What's the origin story here? Why do that?
Yeah, thanks. So our story is perhaps a little bit different in the sense that, well, perhaps let me start with the context. So we're based in Africa. Africa is not just one place, it's many, many different countries with very diverse cultures, very diverse people, and a large population. So Africa's population is about 1 billion people currently, and the interesting fact is more than 300 million of them today are below the age of 24. Also, these African countries have got the fastest growing population rate in the world. So you're looking at population growth rates of between 2 and 4%. So imagine now that those 300 million people by 2050 will be about 450 million, and by 2100 will constitute 43% of the world's population below the age of 24. So just think about that. Clearly the future workforce and this massive need for education sits on the doorstep of the countries that we operate in. You couple that with the gross tertiary enrollment ratio, which in the US is what, 75%, in Asia around 40-odd%, 43%. In our markets, it's literally 1 in 12 or 8%. So imagine of the literally 200 people sitting here, only 30 or 40 of you would ever have the opportunity to go to university. Imagine what that would mean for your culture, for your family, for the community that you operate in or that you live in. So certainly a massive unmet need for education for the future. And unfortunately in our markets as well, the public sector isn't doing the greatest job. So we have, I guess, faculty that are feeling perhaps a little bit undermined, that aren't well paid, that aren't fully engaged in what they do. So over time, there's been a burgeoning private sector that's grown in many of these key markets. So when Honoris was incepted, it wasn't incepted as a sort of a standalone institution, as some of my colleagues are over here. We had a buy and build strategy, and we bought existing successful businesses in the key beacon markets in Africa. So for this reason, we went to Tunisia, we went to Morocco. If you have to be in French West Africa, those are the beacon markets for education that everybody looks to. We went to South Africa, obviously, so sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of those markets look to South Africa for education. And then Nigeria and Egypt are just two massive markets of more than 200 million people each that you simply can't ignore. So we went to those markets as well. Haven't quite finished in Egypt, but we'll get there in time. So really, Honoris was incepted from a buy and build strategy. So number one, we bought leading institutions in those markets, and we created a platform where each of the founding members of these institutions had seen the need to collaborate, where they'd seen that working together with other institutions across Africa, 1 + 1 could certainly equal 4 or 5 or even 10, not just 2. So the platform certainly is leveraging the combined skills and the combined expertise that we have across the network, and truly transforming and creating and trying to fill that gap where the public sector hasn't necessarily achieved what it was meant to achieve.
Okay, so we've got huge need, whether it's teachers or it's the number of students and the unmet need or the systemic attempt to change the system in terms of the fundamental quality of what's offered. I want to combine a question about what and how, and if I can start with you, Mallory. Is there one thing, maybe there's more than one, but is there at least one core element of what you, not why you do it, but what you're delivering, that from the perspective of the quality of the education or the innovative approach to it that you've developed, what is that, and how did that trajectory develop? Was there a key moment where you had a recognition or an oh my God, or I better change ships here? What's the story?
Yeah, again, the story is me pestering Ben Nelson until I figured it out. So I think if there was one way to summarize what REACH does that is different as a delivery method, we offer apprenticeship degrees. So it is a true registered apprenticeship, the way that I might go into an apprenticeship to become an HVAC specialist or to do one of the trades. But instead of going to a trade school, you are going to a university, and instead of working in a construction site, you are training under the supervision of a mentor teacher to become a teacher. That means three things for us, and then sort of the why and how that happened. Thing one is that people get paid to earn their degree. So there is no student loan debt. You are getting paid a salary to work as a paraprofessional, and we braid together Pell plus registered apprenticeship dollars so that you never pay more than $75 a month. But again, usually it's nothing, and you draw a salary the whole time. The second thing that's different is the job itself is 50% of those college credits. And the third thing is that there is a profession waiting for you on the other side when you graduate. So when you are going through that apprenticeship as a paraprofessional, the deal with the school district is when this person graduates, we are training them up to become your special education teacher or your middle school math teacher. So those individuals know that once that degree is in hand, they immediately have about a tripling of their wages to become classroom teacher of record. And there was a moment like that, that led to that sort of watershed, which is I was working as a school principal. It was a school that was serving predominantly newcomer students, and we knew that we needed newcomer adults who had experience as immigrants, who had experience learning English as a second language or a third language. And we kept investing in sending the adults in our building over to our local community college, and they kept dropping out one by one for reasons that had nothing to do with their ability. And when I would call the community college as a school principal who sends a lot of my high school students over there for dual enrollment, I kept getting answers of like, oh, we wish we could, but we just can't. You know, we'd love to do that. We'd love to give credit for work. We'd love to let them work remotely so they don't have to take a bus to get there. We just can't. And finally, I reached a point where like, maybe I'm really dumb, but I don't think the question here is can't. I think the question here is won't. And so if you won't, we will. And that was sort of the moment that started it. And again, it took a long time, but being able to just ask the dumb questions along the way of like, why can't you do this? Show me where it's written down that you can't do this. Came to the realization that most things that we believe in higher education can't be done. That's actually not true at all. There's no reason it can't be done. We just don't.
We just don't, which is a good segue to you, SHAI. You told the story. It seemed like it unfolded magically as if from the gods. You announced this new plan, the New York Times wrote it up, the faculty flocked to it, and everything flowed naturally and easily. But I don't imagine that's the full story. What were the cul-de-sacs, or where did the train almost jump the tracks, and how did you manage that?
First of all, I do think that it was relatively easy. I said that I had experience before with the European university, so I knew how university work. I knew the ingredients that are needed in order to start a university. But I think that, you know, in 2009, UNESCO published a study that says that in 2025, there will be 100 million students that will not have seats in the available universities. Then available universities a year from now. This is only availability. And you were talking about Africa, and in Africa, in every single country, there aren't enough universities to seat the students. Look at the situation in the US. How many students cannot afford higher education? Look at places where students are deprived for political reasons. Refugees will be the best example. Women. Afghanistan will be a great example. So there are so many people who cannot afford higher education. And the idea of having a tuition-free university that will be accessible, affordable, with the right quality, well, the major problem was that it was too good to be true. People did not believe us. And there was skepticism. There still is skepticism. No way. How do you make money? How do you, there is a trick out there. Do you really deliver it? Are you a real university? So there are all these questions, but I think that there are so many, we have 41,000 volunteers. These are people who want this dream to come true. there are so much goodwill in the world, and that's what drives us. Now, is it easy? No, it's not easy. There are challenges. One of the main challenges is actually spreading the word. All these millions of people don't know about us. How do you spread the word? How do you get enough scholarships for those who cannot? We are tuition free, but we are not free. We charge the students $140 per each end of course assessment. So a full BA is $5,600. It's an American accredited degree. So it's a fraction of American college or any university. However, for a lot of people, it's still a lot of money. People cannot afford it. Well, you need scholarship in order to enable them to study, and that's a challenge that we're facing since then. So there are challenges, but I think that overall, it's not as hard as it might have seemed. And
well, that's a good story to tell. If this was full of too many hardship stories, it might scare off more people. But the diversity on the panel is fascinating. Jonathan, you're a private equity-backed company. You're growing quite fast. There's this significant unmet need. Have there been key moments, or is there a moment that you can see of inflection or of we thought we were doing this and we need to stick to it, or no, we have to actually pivot and do that?
Yeah, so I think as we said up front, we have been a buy and build private equity funded business, and I'd say business meaning therefore we are for profit. And some might say that's a dirty word in education or in health where I came from before. To me, it's just a measure of efficiency. I've run not-for-profit businesses, and running a for-profit business, there's something extremely honest in making sure that you deliver the cash and the profit to your shareholders. But that's maybe one thing that we've had to digest and deal with over time. The other is we're a highly entrepreneurial business. So at the one stage, I guess, we have a powerful center of engaged, strong individuals that are very clear on the company strategy. And also, we have managed to embrace and keep all of our founders on board. So the founders who've been highly entrepreneurial, who've developed successful businesses and universities over 20 or 30 years. So although Honoris is only 7 years young, the combined institutions are decades old. And that comes with great learnings and sometimes a slight resistance to change. And ultimately, bringing these institutions and these founders together, that's where I think the magic begins, where like-minded individuals across these various institutions start to see the synergies. And when you ultimately have, as we have, an incredibly strong employability mandate, where ultimately in Africa it's about getting somebody employed. So when a student joins us, we want to be sure that they get a job, that they get value for money, that the dollar that they invest with us gets the adequate kind of return that those families have invested in. So we measure all of these very, very clearly. And the 85% success rate we have there, so 85% of our students are employed within 6 months of graduating from an Honoris university. And also, I think, as I was saying, that push and pull between the highly entrepreneurial founders, the highly innovative center, we have the perfect test bed in Africa for learning and scaling new innovations. So when it comes to new edtechs, new AI, whatever the kind of technology that you can imagine, we're able to test it in one university, see if it works, and then very quickly, because we have this entrepreneurial culture, others will latch onto it. So we bring our academics together, we bring our faculty together, they see what's working in one engineering university as an example, and quickly they adopt it because they want to stay ahead of the curve. The one blessing, in a sense, of Africa is that there isn't the level of investment and development. So we never had to transition from cable to satellite, as an example. There was no cable. There still isn't. There often aren't roads, etc. So literally people adopt mobile technology, they adopt the new technologies far faster than you will see in other more developed economies where there's the resistance to change. And there isn't this simply because there hasn't been anything historically.
So Ben, when you started MINERVA, it was a landline world, right? It was a cable world. if I go back to the Johns Hopkins analogy, you wanted to do something Hopkins-like, not the same model, but you wanted to introduce something that would change the system. You got a lot of great attention early on. There were, you know, the New York Times, the Atlantic, at least in the U.S., the attention to this, but also a lot of questions like, who is this guy? And this is crazy. And it all unfolded seamlessly from there? Or what have you stuck to, and what have you had to think about doing differently in terms of achieving your aspiration?
The remarkable thing about, you know, I was actually just talking to somebody about this recently. He asked me what I do, and I told him I started a university, and he said, oh, you know, you must have done all these pivots and changes. And I said, well, if you were to talk to me in 2011, it was a figment of my imagination. I had no funding. I had no concept of what MINERVA, you know, could be realistically, but I would just sketch out what we would do. I could describe MINERVA as it is today with about 90% accuracy. We have never pivoted. We've never changed the model. We've never changed the mission. We've never changed the model. We've improved it. We've iterated on it. But there were two very big mistakes in my original planning, and they came out of my naivete. Mistake number one was I assumed that because we were charging significantly less than a typical private American university at the time, the good old days, universities were charging about $60,000. Now it's about $100 in our competitive set. And we were charging just under $30. And the big chunk of that was just the cost of being alive, housing, food, stuff that we had no control over. Tuition was about less than a third of what it was at traditional universities at the time, actually about a quarter. And I figured, oh, we are going to charge so much less, we will be flooded with demand, because basically you could buy yourself a very nice car, buy your kid a very nice car, get a better education, and save money compared to going to traditional university. And what I didn't realize was that for a truly meritocratic admissions process that didn't look at wealth, didn't advantage it in any way, the difference between $30,000 a year and $60,000 a year is $0. Because both are ridiculous, astronomical sums of money that 95% of the world can't possibly comprehend, 98% of the world can't possibly comprehend paying. And so whereas I initially thought, oh, this is great, I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna cut the price down, and this is gonna be, oh, I know my supply and demand curves and everything else, right? And I would be flooded with full-paying students. It very quickly became apparent that no, that is not the case. And in fact, because of the admissions process that I maintain throughout, 80% of MINERVA undergraduate students couldn't afford the reduced fees. We have 5 times the number of students matriculated at MINERVA coming from households making $50,000 or less than an incoming Ivy League class, which, by the way, has an endowment that is infinitely larger than ours. And so that was just a fundamentally different aspect. So whereas I thought that my students would be, the two mistakes were I thought that we would have overwhelmingly full-pay students and we would be a very large institution. And it turned out we became a very small institution where the vast majority of the students couldn't pay.
So I'm mindful of the time, and I'm going to give you an option, two options on this question, and you can choose both or pick one. But if you were, the first is if you were giving advice to somebody who wanted to start a new institution, let me call it. Doesn't have to be a university, but something that has some moving parts to it, not just one element. What would you tell them? Or if you were talking to someone in an established university and they say, well, that's fascinating. What you've done is fascinating. What can I learn from that? Or you can make it a little more pugnacious and what they should learn from that. What would you say to them? So either to new founders or to long-standing, 1,000-year-old institutions. SHAI?
Wow. Okay, let's start with the second one. People in existing universities, my advice is just forget it. I think, and I'm not kidding, because the resistance in the existing establishment is so high for change that you pretty much have no chance. The only way, look, I'll give you one example of something that we do. Our admission process is asking all the students, anyone is welcome. You have a high school diploma, this is actually accreditation requirement. Come to us, take 2 courses. If you pass them, you're admitted. You become degree-seeking students, you get credit for these 2 courses, and continue with them. If you don't pass the courses, you simply cannot continue with us. This is our way to vet the students, and for the students to vet us. Amazing way, win-win. Now, think about the consequences. We hardly need admission department, right? Now, tell any university, use our model. You can fire your entire admission department, right? Just try it, right? So I think that there are so many elements that exist in every university that is extremely hard to change. The only way to succeed is to start something new from the outside. So universities can do that if they do a standalone unit that will do it, that will not be part of the university. That's the only way that I believe that they can succeed.
Yeah. Jonathan, to new founders or to old-timers?
Yeah, so, I mean, we sit with a bit of a dichotomy, I guess, because Tunisia is home to the world's oldest university, believe it or not, literally thousands of years ago. And we also have some of the freshest and newest universities, some of which are owned by Honoris. A classic example is our medical simulation center. So when I was a kid at medical school all those years ago, it was see one, do one, teach one, and quite a few humans got hurt along the way as I struggled to put in a do a venesection or my first cesarean section. These days, it's a lot more nuanced. You can do that in a medical simulation center on a dummy and not hurt anybody. And we do that very effectively across our business. So I think the first lesson is that, at least in Africa, scale counts. We've grown from a little over 5,000 students to, we'll be close to 100,000 in the coming year. We've grown from literally 1 or 2 institutions now to 17 institutions on 75 campuses, employing more than 4,000 people. And that's been done in a very short space of time. And I think that's just testament to the fact that there is such unmet need in Africa. It really is a continent that is ripe for change and full of opportunity. And then the second point that I was saying was the innovation. It really is an incredible test bed or test ground for groundbreaking innovation. So those who are in EdTech or wanting to try something, here we are at Honoris. Give us a go. We can be your distribution partner to assist you with that. But don't neglect the continent. It's forgotten about. So much EdTech and so much testing ground is done in Europe and America. Let's look to the rest of the world as well. So I would say, so much opportunity, please go there.
Mallory, for new founders or old institutions, what do you take a whack?
Say for both.
Okay.
And the advice is pick your North Star, pick the one thing you're about that you're not going to get wrong, and be willing to let everything else get messy. So for us, that was apprenticeship degrees, this idea that working for your degree was not compromising on quality to become affordable. It was actually, as someone who's had a cesarean and does not want to be the first person that someone is going to do a C-section on, also the child that came out of that, I don't want her teacher to be learning how to teach a kid the first time she is in her class. And so that was our North Star, right? That I want you to have that experience. I want you to know how to do that. And I think that if we're smart, we can make that affordable because you are working along the way. We had to let everything else go. Admissions policies, credit hour requirements, everything. And that's really hard. Any organization is a Swiss watch, right? Not just universities. You can't just pop one cog out, change it out, and expect that the rest of the watch is going to start moving in that direction. And so you've got to build from the cog that is the most important, and you've got to go around and systematically change everything around it, and it's messy and it's hard. And that's why you have to be damn clear on what that one thing is before you start.
Which is a good segue to Ben, because of course one of the challenges of established universities, it's both, right, it's the great thing about our universities, it's also the terrible thing, which is they aren't one thing. It's hard to say what the North Star is, and you can either celebrate that, research, teaching, social engagement, alumni, grass cutting, whatever kinds of things, or it's all bundled up, or you can say that's precisely why we need these new institutions, because there isn't a single North Star. Which not coincidentally brings me to you, Ben, who've thought a lot about this question. What kind of advice do you want to offer?
I'll follow Mallory's footsteps, and I'll give the same advice to both. When you build something, you rarely have a chance to pause and reflect. And a few years ago, we decided, boy, we've learned a lot of things along the way. We should probably write it down. And we wrote this book, which is a very bizarre, esoteric book about how to build your own university, called Building the Intentional University, which has a very small but very bizarrely fanatically devoted fan base. and I got to start thinking about what had gotten us from the figment of my imagination to where we were at the time, which was teaching our second class. And I realized we should not have existed. There is no mechanism that should have allowed MINERVA to exist. We shouldn't have been able to get our funding. We shouldn't have been able to get our faculty. We shouldn't have been able to get our students. When they showed up, they shouldn't have been able to get the kinds of internships and jobs that they got. We shouldn't have been able to get this data that we taught students better systems thinking skills in 8 months than any university had ever demonstrated they could do in 4 years. None of this should have happened. And I realized that if I knew at that point what it would have taken to execute this insane plan, I would have never started. Wouldn't have done it. Because it wouldn't have worked. I happened to have had a random bottle with a lightning catcher in it, and it just got hit with lightning over and over and over and over again, and it all fell into place. And that's a terrible idea. I think one of the reasons that was SHAI saying that you can't really just tell a university, here's a good idea, why don't you do it? I'm like, sure, I'll do that. It is impossible for people to just do it. And this is why they need help. So whether you're starting a new institution or you're an existing institution that wants to change, much like regular education, knowing something is not the same as being able to execute it. You need to work with people who know how to execute it and enable you to actually implement either the idea and make it a reality if you're a brand new institution, or the reform and the end goal and go through the transformation process. Because if you try to do it alone, maybe you'll be up here with us, but I guarantee you that for the four of us, there have been 4,000 that are not on this stage because we lucked out.
Well, in 56 seconds, but I want to underscore just 3 things which all came out in this panel and are also the story we found looking at all these other 8 universities. One is the global dimension of this. So often it's this US conversation, and it's an important one, but the scale and the need is just so huge, and it leads to the opportunities that we've talked about. The second is the North Star. Everybody up here is audacious. They wouldn't be here if they weren't. The stories we found were, just founders who are like Wile E. Coyote. They go off the cliff, and so long as they don't look down, basically the system keeps on working. And the last part, though, was that a lot of those founders, just as you all have indicated, there's some level of flexibility that has to be built in. They were not flexible about their end goals, but they were flexible at times about when Fred Swaniker built African Leadership University, and they called it the Harvard of Africa. Everybody wanted to stop and say, we've built the Harvard of Africa, stop. And he said, I don't care. I didn't set out to build the Harvard of Africa. I set out to build 3,000 ethical, effective leaders to change the politics and the economics of Africa. And I can't do that by building the Harvard of Africa. And half the people had to be fired or left. So there's flexibility in the service of a North Star. And we're out of time. Thank you.